Okay, so picture this. It's 1944, right in the middle of World War II, and a veteran from the First World War publishes this absolute bombshell of a book. His claim? That for centuries, the real reasons we go to war have been completely hidden from all of us. This is our explainer on the core arguments of Edwin C. Knuth's very controversial theory in The Empire of the City.
You see, the author, Edwin C. Knuth, he didn't just disagree with the official story for why America jumped into World War I. He flat out called them brazen falsehoods. And that accusation had some serious weight behind it, because he wasn't just some historian in a library. He was a veteran of that very war.
And that accusation? It basically sparked a lifelong obsession for him. Knuth dedicated himself to answering one giant question. If the American people weren't really in control of their own country's foreign policy, then who was? His whole research was about trying to find the hidden hand he was sure was shaping world events.
To really get his theory, you first have to understand the man himself. Edwin C. Knuth wasn't just an academic. He was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army at the end of World War I. And, what he saw, it left him deeply, deeply disillusioned.
And you can hear it in his own words. He wrote that he was filled with resentment as the deluge of utterly obvious and brazen falsehood by which participation in that war had been forced upon the American people was exposed. I mean, you can just feel that sense of betrayal, right? This wasn't just intellectual curiosity for him. It was personal, and it's what fueled his investigation for decades.
And he wasn't alone in feeling this way. You had prominent historians like Charles and Mary Beard who called the whole war for democracy narrative a gleaming mirage. The famous publicist Walter Lippmann said the real reasons were never admitted. It all fed into this popular idea that was floating around that some powerful secret group of international financiers was pulling all the strings.
So all this suspicion, it all builds to the absolute core of Knuth's theory. He became convinced that his research had finally uncovered the identity and the location of this secret group, a kind of super government that was hiding right out in the open. And this was it. Not London, the huge city we all know, but the city, a tiny 1.12 square mile financial district nestled right inside of it. Knuth argued that this little area wasn't just a part of Britain. He claimed it was a completely separate sovereign world state. And this, he said, was the true center of a global financial empire. In Knuth's mind, this wasn't just about making money. He described a colossal organization that operates as a super government of the world, influencing major events thousands of miles away from its tiny borders. It was just a staggering claim to make. So, the big question, right? How could a 1 square mile district possibly have that much power? Well, Knuth claimed it was all done through a ruthless geopolitical strategy that he called the balance of power game. And he said the strategy worked in 3 simple steps. First, you divide the major powers of Europe into 2 opposing teams that are pretty much equal in strength. Second, you make sure Britain holds the unique position of being able to join either side and tip the scales. And third, you use that incredible leverage to control any nation that even thinks about challenging the financial dominance of the city. Now, Knuth wasn't just making this stuff up. He spent years digging through historical records for what he believed was proof. He argued that this balance of power game had been played for over 100 years, and it resulted in this predictable cycle of what he saw as orchestrated wars. He laid out more than a century of conflict to try and prove his point, and he saw a really consistent pattern. From the Napoleonic Wars all the way to World War I, Britain and its allies would always line up against whichever continental power was getting too strong at the moment. First it was France, then Russia, and finally Germany. Just take World War I. Knuth points out that the Allied powers had a combined population of 1.2 billion people, and they were facing off against the Central Powers' 120 million. That's a 10-to-1 advantage. For him, this wasn't anything close to a fair fight. It was evidence of a massive global coalition carefully built to crush one specific target. But hang on, how could any of this happen in a supposed democracy like Britain? Well, Knuth's answer was that the government the public saw wasn't the one with the real power. He described this hidden, dual structure. Knuth basically laid it out like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde system. On the surface, you've got the public government, the Dr. Jekyll. That's the Democratic Parliament, the House of Commons, handling everyday domestic stuff. But behind that, he argued, was the Mr. Hyde,
a secret empire controlled by the city and the privately owned Bank of England, and they were the ones dictating foreign and financial policy for their own benefit. So, after all of this research, all of this digging, what was the final, shocking conclusion that Knuth came to about how the world really works? When you boil it all down, Knuth's ultimate conclusion was this: the great conflicts of modern history weren't really about democracy versus autocracy or this ideology versus that one. He argued the true engine of history was a secret financial oligarchy centered in the city that was orchestrating events simply to protect and expand its own power.
So let's just recap the core arguments here. It all starts with a disillusioned soldier's resentment over war propaganda. That resentment leads to a lifelong investigation that pinpoints the City of London as a hidden world power. He claims the primary tool of this power is the balance of power game, which it uses to orchestrate wars for profit. And the whole thing is kept under wraps, hidden from the public by a secret dual government.
And all of this brings us to one last thought. Whether you find Knuth's theory totally compelling or just plain conspiratorial, it leaves us with a really critical question. How does this 80-year-old idea of hidden financial power change how we see history, and maybe even how we see the world today?